you have presence. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all here. My name is Douglas Fife. I'm a senior fellow here at Hudson Institute, and I'd like to welcome you, those of you who are here at Hudson and those of you who are viewing this panel over the internet. Israel gets an extraordinary amount of attention in the United States and around the world. I mean, one could say of it what was once said about 100 years ago of the Balkans, that Israel produces more history than it can consume domestically. Israel is indeed a country of significance, one that affects lives all around the world, and not just because of security and diplomatic issues relating to the Iranian nuclear program or the future of the West Bank. Israel is significant to the world as part of the world's advanced economy. In fact, it's an astoundingly fruitful part of the world's high technology economy. And this is all the more remarkable because it was not long ago that Israel was considered something of an economic basket case, burdened with socialist policies established when the State of Israel was first established. Israel in the 1980s suffered from hyperinflation and a wildly fluctuating currency. I mean, there were, as is typical in Israel, jokes about all of this. So, I mean, the joke about the inflation was people used to say, if you have to go somewhere, is it better to take a taxi or a bus? And they decided, well, it's actually better to take a taxi because you pay at the end. And so the currency that you're paying with is worth so much less at the end of the trip. And then, you know, when you talked about the currency, there was a story, it may be apocryphal, but the story of the former Israeli foreign minister, Abba Eban, who was a very witty guy, who met with I believe, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and is reported to have asked with a smile, he said, you know, one day the dollar is worth 10 Israeli pounds, and the next day it's worth 13 Israeli pounds, then it's back to 9 Israeli pounds. How can America survive with such an unstable currency? You know, as we will learn more today, Israel transcended these problems and has developed one of the world's most productive and entrepreneurial and technologically advanced economies in the world. And it's done so in part through cooperation with American companies and investors. And Israel's success offers lessons that are relevant to the United States as we confront our own economic challenges today. And we have a fine panel to discuss U.S. Israeli technology, trade, and investment. On my left is Josh Cram, who is Senior Advisor for the Middle East and North African Affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where he directs the U.S. Israel Business Initiative, which is the only Washington-based national program focused on advancing business partnerships between the United States and Israel. Mr. Cram also serves as Washington representative for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa with honors in political science from the University of Florida and has a business degree from Emory University. And next to him is Dr. Eitan Yudalevich, who is the executive director of the BIRD Foundation, BIRD standing for Binational Industrial Research and Development Foundation. And what the BIRD Foundation does will be explained by Eitan. Eitan, before taking over his responsibilities at Bird in 2006, had a fascinating career in various Israeli high-tech ventures. He managed the Rafael, which is the Israel Armaments Development Authority's operations in the United States. He was general manager of Rafael's missile division and vice president of its marketing and business development. He's been a member or chairman of numerous boards of international joint ventures and was chairman of the board of Opgal, an electro-optics company. He has his doctorate in the field of medical in computers and systems engineering in the field of medical imaging from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York. He has a master's in mathematics from Rensselaer and a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering from Technion in Haifa. And Eitan was born in Chile, in case you're wondering whether that accent is Israeli. Victor Mizrahi is the principal of Mizrahi Enterprises. He's an entrepreneur specializing in the field of optical technologies. He advises and invests in technology companies. He holds multiple patents in optical technologies. He founded and then served as president and CEO of Semrock, the industry leader in developing and manufacturing high-performance optical filters for the biotechnology industry. He piloted the successful sale of Semrock to IDEX Corporation. Semrock was originally founded to develop and manufacture components, optical components for the telecommunications industry, and then was repositioned to do optical filters for the biotech industry. Before 2001, Dr. Mizrahi was chief scientist for Ciena Corporation, which developed and manufactures optical networking systems for voice and internet traffic. His background before that was with Bell Laboratories. He was an assistant research professor at the Optical Sciences Center at the University of Arizona. He has his PhD in physics from the University of Toronto, master's in science from the Weizmann Institute in Israel, Bachelor of Science with high distinction from the University of Toronto. And at the end of our table here, we have Greg Slater from Intel Corporation. Greg directs the Trade and Competition Policy office there. He's in charge of influencing competition policy developments worldwide and directs the implementation of trade and competitiveness-related strategies to advance Intel's business worldwide. Earlier, he served as the Group General Counsel for Intel's Corporate Services Division, has been the lead lawyer for all government agreements related to Intel's factory investments worldwide, and also earlier at Intel worked on the legal aspects of Intel's environmental health and safety issues around the world. He was in private law practice in Washington at Steptoe and Johnson and then the Latham and Watkins firm. He began his law career as a clerk for former Chief Judge Albert Engel on the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Sixth Circuit after graduating summa cum laude from the law school at Brigham Young University. And what I'd like to do is first of all, what I'd like to do is ask for a round of applause to welcome our guest speakers.
Thank you.
And then I'd like to call on Josh Cram to begin our discussion.
Well, thank you, Doug, and really thanks for having me and putting this panel together. You know, I think it's really significant that the Hudson Institute is doing something like this because, you know, as Doug said, when you when you think about the U.S.-Israel relationship, you think about our overarching strategic relationship, our shared values as Judeo-Christian nations, democracies, Israel as a country that shares our, a focus on the rule of law and things like this, an outpost of freedom and democracy. But you don't hear much about the commercial relationship, and especially here in Washington, you don't really hear about the commercial relationship between the two countries. You'll see our relationship largely in the context of politics, security, and defense, and for sure there's good reason for that. But I think it's also significant to talk about the commercial piece, and I'm glad that that's the conversation that we're going to have today, and applaud Hudson for putting this forum together. It's probably not for good reason. There's probably a good reason why the relationship has been seen through one context for a long time. Not long ago, the U.S.-Israel commercial relationship consisted of American Jews buying Israel bonds, U.S. government economic assistance to Israel, and of course, Jaffa oranges, everyone's favorite export from the state of Israel, right? Today, the story is very, very different. And Doug alluded to this. Israel is a country of 7 million people, leads the world in startups per capita, more companies on the NASDAQ outside of the United States and China, more R&D going into Israel than half of Europe combined. The statistics are truly amazing, and they're really staggering. And even the statistics around U.S.-Israel trade, besides sort of the innovation ecosystem in Israel, the statistics around U.S.-Israel trade are also equally as impressive. Israel is 2% of the Middle East North Africa region, and today accounts for about 25% of American exports into the Middle East and North Africa. And Ohad Cohen, who's right back there, Israel's wonderful commercial attaché, the Israeli embassy's commercial attaché, told me yesterday that Israel passed Saudi Arabia as the #1 destination for American exports into the Middle East just this year. So that's truly an amazing thing that we don't hear a lot about. The U.S. and Israel have a free trade agreement that this year is 26 years old. Trade, you can look, and trade has expanded, tenfold since that time. But another part of the story, and I think what a lot of the conversation here today is going to be about, is how Israel's really a critical growth partner for the United States in helping us out-innovate and outgrow great companies to compete globally. I think, the global economy today is changing more than it ever has in recent history. Competition is fierce. There's new actors emerging across the world, and the playing field for American business is becoming more and more uneven. And the question is, how can we, the American business community, partner in the right way, find the right kinds of innovation that will enable us to compete globally? So the U.S. Chamber, many of you may be familiar with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's the largest business federation in the world, representing about 3 million business interests from across the country. Large companies, small companies, everything in between, across sectors. You hear a lot about the Chamber, obviously, on the domestic agenda. I'm sure you'll hear more about the Chamber as the election cycle heats up more and more. What you don't hear as much about is the international work that the Chamber does. And there's about 100 people over just a couple of blocks from here that focus on advocating for American business interests overseas and looking for ways to sort of open and develop markets and create partnerships between American companies in countries around the world. And we know that the most innovative companies on the planet have R&D centers in Israel, have innovation centers in Israel. And Greg is a great example. He's going to talk about what Intel's doing, which is really the case study. Intel is the example that everyone cites when they're talking about an American company that's collaborating with Israel in R&D. But there are more than 100 American R&D centers in Israel. Another great example, just to show you how far this has come, just in December, Apple announced that it was acquiring an Israeli company for $500 million and opening up its first R&D facility outside of the United States, which is in Israel, which is truly amazing. And it's happening across sectors. Tonight, I'm actually going to Israel with a delegation of executives of life science companies. So this is the Mercks and the Boston Scientifics and the Takeda Pharmaceuticals and the Oracles and the GEs to explore really on the R&D innovation side what Israel has to offer and where these kinds of companies can plug in. So that's clearly what the U.S. has to gain. And I think on the flip side, from day one that that an Israeli entrepreneur starts to build a company, he or she needs our help. I mean, he or she needs access to global markets, capital, and the managerial know-how to grow and scale a company, all which the United States is a critical partner in enabling the Startup Nation. If you haven't read the book Startup Nation by Dan Senor and Saul Singer, just a little plug, it's a fantastic read, and I would strongly encourage you to take a look. But the Chamber of Commerce is committed to this relationship not because we're ardent Zionists per se. You know, we're ardent capitalists. We believe that this relationship helps American companies innovate, build, and grow. I think it helps us create jobs here in the United States, and I know Eitan, through the great work of the Bird Foundation, is going to talk a lot about that piece of the story. And of course, catalyzes breakthrough technologies. There's a lot of great stories that we can tell about American companies working in Israel, and I'm sure Greg has a lot of those stories, but we can talk more about that as well, about how American companies that are working in Israel create these great products that then go global. You know, a good example is Google Suggest. This was a product that was developed in R&D Israel. If you're on Google, if you're typing in a search in the Google search function, and it'll predict what you're going to write. That was actually developed in Israel for the Chinese market, because what they found was that it takes a long time to write Chinese letters out. So what they found was that there was a way to shortcut that, and you know, it was so successful that they ended up scaling it to 150 markets around the world. So just another interesting example. So the chamber and what we're doing, just to kind of give you a snapshot, is we're looking to impact the storyline around U.S. Israel relationship here in Washington D.C. To add the commercial piece to this. The U.S. Israel relationship is critical, and we think that this piece of it's not getting as much play, not getting as much action, and we hope that we can look for ways to profile it and highlight it in lots of different ways. Last month we hosted House Majority Leader Eric Cantor and one of our partners in Israel, Ofer Strauss, who runs a company called Strauss Groups. One of their companies you may have heard of is Sabra Dipping Company, which has a joint venture with PepsiCo. And believe it or not, that joint venture has built the largest hummus facility in the entire world, which is in Richmond, Virginia, and by the way, employs about 400 Americans. And so that's an interesting, again, story of partnerships creating jobs, and something that we want to showcase here in Washington, and we want to tell the American business community, we want to make sure that not just the high-tech community is turned on to Israel and able to take advantage of opportunities to partner with Israel, but across sectors. And I think there's a lot of great opportunities for that. And then on the public policy domain, I think there are a lot of issues that affect our relationship. I think we're lucky, in terms of doing business for American companies, it's really relatively easy. There are very few barriers, cultural barriers, trade barriers. It's really easy for American companies to do business in Israel. There may be things that we can do to strengthen our company's abilities. However, just last month, our U.S. Trade representatives were in Israel talking to the Ministry of Industry, Trade, and Labor about ways to upgrade the U.S.-Israel Free Trade Agreement to look at things like e-commerce and services trade and standards and things like this. And just this week, actually, the House of Representatives passed a bill that would enable Israel to be on sort of the E2 visa status country, which is a big deal that would enable Israeli investors that want to buy a company here or invest resources here to be able to come here and be near their investment, which is an important thing, I think, for encouraging bilateral commerce between the two countries. So really, I think our message here is there's a lot going on. It's very exciting. It's a great time to be looking at this, but I think we've only hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of the potential for the U.S.-Israel commercial relationship. There are a lot of different sectors, from natural gas. Israel discovered this unbelievable natural gas find up the coast of Haifa, to renewable technologies and water technologies, where Israel really is strong, to other areas. And I think, on cybersecurity and beyond, where Israel has a real strong capacity. So I think, we're excited and glad that you're excited, and hopefully we'll have an interesting conversation.
Thank you. Eitan Yudilevich.
Thank you. we need.
And yeah, we'll get the slides projected here.
Okay. So thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here at the Hudson Institute, and I want to thank Doug again for inviting me and the initiative. And actually, my presentation relates very nicely to Josh's words and description, because what I'm going to talk about is one of the important tools that we have to promote U.S. Israeli cooperation. I think one of the it's important to look at the lessons learned from these successful collaborations and why they are successful. And incidentally, I just came from the State Department from a meeting there, and their question always is how can they apply this bird model to other countries. And succeeding in international collaboration of this type is not easy, and this organization has been in place for 35 years. I've been with BIRD 6 years, but this organization has been in place for actually 6 years. And before I get into BIRD, I wanted to show you a little bit of those interesting and sometimes not so well-known, well-known innovations, but not so well-known that they come from Israel. For example, if you look in the left bottom, flash memory, invented by a company called M Systems in Israel, which was acquired by SanDisk not long ago. In the second row, second column in the top, you see the video camera peel. Actually, you swallow, and it has a small TV camera and a data link, communication link, that allows to do imaging of the intestine, invented in Israel. And actually also that's a development that came out of, you can say, the defense industry. Or, today we're talking about cybersecurity a lot, and the Weizmann Institute is well known for its first contributions and important contributions actually to encryption software. Many of the commercial encryption software that is used today was rooted there in the Weizmann Institute. And medical imaging, and of course you see in the right-hand side Better Place, which actually may be a little bit early to include here, but if you look at the details of that implementation of an electric car, they're very, very novel. And you can look at that, we can go on and on. And actually, I can say one word about it. It's not here in this chart, but it's for sure. Without U.S. Israeli collaboration, these things would not have happened. We say Israeli innovations, but in most cases, they're a result of an Israeli entrepreneur coming with a good idea, but without the relationship with the U.S. and the involvement in the U.S. market and the collaboration with U.S. companies, most of them could not have happened. So we have been doing this for 35 years. And there were people in the 70s, the late 70s, that had this great vision of establishing an organization that will fund companies, not academic researchers, companies. Government funding companies has not been very popular. So today, when we present this and you say you're successful, the people don't believe that. Okay, how can this be successful? The government interfering in the work of private companies. But it does work, and the reason why it works is because what we're stimulating, and we're a catalyst to collaboration between two companies that in many cases would have a hard time getting together and achieving their goals. And this was certainly true in the early 80s, when Israel was only beginning to develop its high-tech sector, but it's also very true today. And today, the benefit is really and truly mutual. You can see there are mutual benefit. Mutual benefit. What does it mean, mutual benefit? Mutual benefit means that certainly the Israeli company benefits from its relationship with the U.S. company. But the U.S. company also gets injection of innovation. Innovation that comes from external innovation, we call that. Innovation that comes outside its own borders and outside the United States. And today, you may have heard this in the press, or maybe you have read. There's a new report that came out of the Commerce Department, January 2012, discussing the issue of competitiveness and the relationship between competitiveness and innovation in the U.S., but this cannot be applied to Israel as well. And it states clearly that one of the main factors to maintain and enhance the U.S. competitiveness is innovation. And in that sense, BIRD is a great contributor to both the U.S. and Israel. The other thing that I can say about this organization is that it has proven to be robust. Okay, 35 years of work, and the model is robust. From the point of view of performance, we have funded the hundreds of projects, more than 800, and we have also, we can also relate to sales, or let's say we have a measure of sales that are related to the projects funded by BIRD, more than $8 billion. And those $8 billion, of course, brought jobs to Israel and to the U.S., and let's say at least half of those jobs are certainly in the U.S. Now, only to explain a little bit the model, the idea is very simple. You have two companies that decide to work together, and or two companies that we have helped get together, and the idea is that we can provide funding up to 50% of the project, and we are limited today to $1 million per project. And that funding is called conditional grant, because if the project is successful, there is a repayment mechanism. But if the project turns to be not successful commercially, it becomes a grant. So actually, very simple model, but it can be applied very broadly, and as I said, the results have been very good. You can think about this model as a public-private partnership. Okay, the government is providing funding, the companies are providing at least 50% of the funding. So the risk is being shared, both by the companies and the government. You can ask yourself, why is this necessary? I mean, why can't the companies do this by themselves? Why do we need to provide funding? It's actually a commercial venture. So the answer is quite simple. It was certainly very important in the 80s, but we are looking at today at a world in which connecting companies from different places is critical for global competitiveness. So both the U.S. and Israel need this, and the fact of life is that you cannot do things by yourself, and if you want to enter the additional market, you need to cooperate. Now, the Israeli companies certainly need the cooperation with the U.S. company. Okay? The question is, why is the U.S. company so interested in cooperating with the Israeli company? So one is the innovation. Okay. Second is that possibly this Israeli company can also help the U.S. company enter other markets. You know, Israel today is very based in export, and most of these Israeli companies, their main markets are outside Israel. So in some sense, they can also help the U.S. companies enter additional markets. We are focused, or we are not focused. We work in all subjects, as you see here. A lot of life sciences. There's a term clean tech, which means actually renewable energy and energy efficiency, and also water, but mainly renewable energy and energy efficiency, and I will discuss that in a minute. And you see Homeland Security, healthcare, IT. So we are very broad in our interest. Now let me give you two examples of the hundreds we have. This project is in the area of life sciences, medical instrumentation. It's a company called Argo in Israel, which developed a device that can allow a paralyzed person to actually stand up and walk. is kind of robot. The person wears it. Maybe you've seen this featured in TV. Actually, it was featured in Good Morning America. It even was in Glee, in the famous program. And yeah, the paralyzed guy there got an Argo device as a present for Christmas in 2010. And he even says it comes from Israel. And they are cooperating with a company in Philadelphia. Together, they're doing the medical trials in an hospital, in most rehab hospital in Philadelphia. And this is something that we are, this is a project we are supporting. They already have gone to first FDA approvals, and hopefully this will be a revolution. It is already, but we believe it will be a revolutionary device for many people. And you can see, if you look at YouTube videos with the people testifying on that. The second project is totally different, and this is in the area of alternative fuels, renewable energy. And here we are talking about a program called Bird Energy, which I will say a word about it because it's very important. A couple of years ago, 2009, we started a new program called Bird Energy. It's supported by the Department of Energy and the Ministry of Energy and Water in Israel with new funding, not related to the original funding we have. And this new funding came from both governments. But actually, I can say that all started with legislation in Congress, which was issued in 2007, at the end of 2007. And this allows us to focus or fund projects in the area of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and of course alternative fuels, which are very, very important these days in order to reduce dependency on oil. And this specific project is between a company in Madison, Wisconsin called Virent, which produces biogasoline from sugars. But there's a need to do this from feedstock that are not, for example, corn. Corn is not a good feedstock for this. So the Israeli company provides a solution to produce the sugars from wood. And wood is cellulosic, it's called. This is a great partnership. It's going very well. And they're already producing biofuels from the combination of both processes. And the Israeli company is setting a manufacturing facility in Mississippi. So here you have R&D in Israel. The Israeli company will set a manufacturing facility with hundreds of employees in Mississippi, and they will produce biogasoline even for the Air Force. So also a very interesting success. Finally, I want to say that we are open to receiving proposals. If you are interested to participate in our program, it's called Bird Energy. That's the new program. And I can say that from our point of view, we will continue seeking an U.S. Israeli cooperation, and we get a lot of support. Here in the room are people that I have to thank them for their support to our programs. And I think they do that also because they believe that this is certainly good for both countries, for the economy of both countries, and hopefully this will continue succeeding us until as in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor Mizrahi.
Thank you.
We will get your slides up in a moment.
All right.
There.
Very good. Well, first of all, Doug, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it. Just to give you a sense of my perspective, where I'm coming from, I'm a former entrepreneur, veteran of 2 successful startup companies who has now turned his attention to investing in and advising early-stage technology companies. As it happens, I'm now interested in clean tech, but I'm relatively new to this. I've found a nice investment in Israel in the form of a company called Slater. When I say I'm new to this, I should qualify that by saying that I've only been investing in Israel for a little bit over a year. I haven't experienced the exit process yet, so I'm not fully qualified perhaps to be here, but at least I can speak to the question of, first of all, why invest in startup companies in Israel? And the answer to that starts with the fact that there are a lot of great opportunities. And those opportunities come with people who have a tremendous entrepreneurial spirit. It almost seems like everybody and his uncle in Israel wants to start a company. There's a great can-do attitude, which is incredibly important. I can tell you from personal experience, if you don't have that, you're going to have a hard time in a startup company. And there's a lot of leadership potential there, which is extremely important as well. Got a very well-educated workforce, world-class universities, and universities that know how to commercialize technology. Now, when you look at the breadth of opportunities in Israel, and by the way, this data is called from an Israeli government website, you'll see that their data is from 2010. In 2010, about $1.3 billion was invested in startup companies, in technology opportunities. Of that, I'd like to point out that only about 6% went into clean tech. Now that's what, maybe $80 million. In the grand scheme of things, that's not really that much money. And yet, just recently, in 2012, Israel was ranked number 2 in the world on the Global Clean Tech Innovation Index. This is an index that measures a country's potential for innovating and commercializing clean tech. So that's a pretty good return on investment. And I will also add that a lot of clean tech investments tend to be very big ticket items. Compare, for example, with the infamous cylinder in this country, where the U.S. government invested over $500 million. So I'd say the return on investment is good, and that works very well for a smaller investor such as myself, because even if I had been inclined to participate in a cylinder, which fortunately I was not, it's just too large an investment for somebody like me. But I've been able to find a nice sized investment in Israel in the form of this company, Slater, which, by the way, is developing lower cost fuel cells to compete with diesel generators, in fact, replace diesel generators at cell sites in countries such as India. Now, why specifically Israel? Well, first of all, there's plenty of official encouragement. So, for example, I get leads on a fairly regular basis from the Israeli embassy here in Washington. Even though I'm living thousands of miles away from Israel, they're looking to encourage investment in Israel, and that works well for me. You've just heard from the Bird Foundation. There are mechanisms for getting funding for Israeli startup companies that are effective and efficient. In addition to that, many Israeli companies can access international funds, as for example, Department of Energy grants or programs in Europe. The fact of the matter is, though, that most of the funding is going to have to come from the private sector, as it should, and that typically means venture capital investing. The reality is that since 2008, venture capital investing is way down. People are running scared. The economy took a big hit in 2008. That's to be expected. But the hit was particularly large in Israel. If you look at the drop in investment from 2008 to 2010, it was about 39%. Pretty big reduction. That's not to say it didn't go down in this country as well. It did. Venture investing in the United States dropped by about 24%. But that's an interesting comparison, because what it says is that American venture capital companies who do invest in Israel pulled back even more than they did in this country, which is, again, also to be expected. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. For somebody such as me, that's actually a very good thing. Personally, I don't know about you, but I prefer to go shopping when everything's on sale rather than when everybody is fighting to get a piece of the action. So it works out nicely for the small investors willing to take a chance. I would also argue that investing in Israel comes with a culture that is to some large degree self-perpetuating. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, you've got a lot of the world's best companies innovating in Israel. They have R&D facilities in Israel. Historically, this has typically come about because they have purchased some Israeli company that they liked, but then they stayed because the culture of innovation was strong there. Now, what happens? So you've got R&D facilities in Israel associated with major multinational corporations, and you've got young kids coming out of school, and they're technically minded, and they need a job, so they go work at one of these companies, and these become great incubators. They learn the ropes, they learn the business, but if they're entrepreneurially minded, they may very well go off and join a startup company or maybe start the company. If that company is successful, guess what happens? A multinational comes in and acquires it, and the whole cycle starts over again. This is very similar to what happens in Silicon Valley. Now, I don't want to just make statements here without backing them up, so let me give you some data to support the contention. And I'll take all the examples from this calendar year, 2012. We'll start in January. We actually already just heard the first example from Josh, but it bears repeating. 2012, January, Apple acquired a flash memory manufacturer, Anabit, for about $400 to $500 million. And guess what? Apple now has its first overseas R&D facility. Okay, February 2012. Company called F5 acquired an Israeli startup company, Trafix, for about $140 million. Now, that's not a really huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but you know what? Only $12 million had been invested. So that is a tremendous return on investment for the venture capitalists. And if you're a small investor such as I am, you like hearing stories like that. That's a good thing. It's not just U.S. companies interacting with Israeli startups, though. In March of 2012, Singapore Telecom acquired an Israeli startup for about $300 million. And now they're expected to expand again their R&D facilities in Israel. And just last week, not to say that we're not staying current here, but just last week, Cisco announced a $5 billion deal. This is a British company called NDS, so why am I talking about if it's British? Well, you know what? It actually started out as an Israeli company, but far more to the point, a whopping 1,300 out of their 5,000 employees work in the R&D center in Jerusalem. Now, in addition to all of this, there are some significant advantages due to geography. Okay, there's an interesting statement. You might want to pause and think about that for a moment. How many times have you heard somebody say that Israel's an advantage because of geography? Everybody normally says, you know, Israel's a small, isolated country. This doesn't sound like a good thing, but there's an upside to everything. So let's talk about networking. Everybody knows the importance, the value of networking in any enterprise or in life for that matter. So when you're a small country like that, it's almost like everybody knows everybody else. It makes it a lot easier for somebody like me to do due diligence. It makes it easier for me to find new leads. But far more important than that, it makes it easier for the entrepreneurs in Israel to network with each other. And this is very powerful. In addition to that, Israel, of course, has historically strong ties to the United States. But because of geography, Israel is in a nice position to do business with Europe, with India, with China. And in fact, the company that I mentioned that I've invested in sees one of its primary markets as being in India. Now, the fact is that when you're an Israeli company, you're probably thinking internationally from day one. Why? Because the truth is that the market in Israel is relatively small. This is a country with a population comparable to that of metropolitan London. So you're a startup company, you better be thinking internationally. You know, that is a very good thing. Israeli immigration policy is also helpful. For example, back in the 90s, there was a big wave of immigration from Russia and the former Soviet Union countries. With this wave of immigration came qualified scientists and engineers and mathematicians and professionals of all type. This has played into the startup environment very nicely. And you also have immigration from countries such as the United States, of course. Now, contrast that with U.S. immigration policy, and I'm going to speak from personal experience here, as somebody who has on more than one occasion had to fight to get a visa or get a visa extended for some bright employee. You know, it's really odd. This country invites the best and brightest from all over the world to come and study at our universities, and yet when they graduate, it's not necessarily so straightforward to stay here and to contribute. I've never understood that, but it's not that way in Israel. That doesn't mean that everything is perfect. Of course, there are certainly challenges. And here's one that may surprise you. The fact is that engineers are virtually at full employment in Israel. That's good news for the engineers, but it's pretty tough if you're a startup company trying to hire. You've got to be quite scrappy to attract the best and brightest to your particular company. You also need to think about the labor laws. There's some extra overhead involved. For example, you need to sequester funds to pay for possible severance when the employee leaves. So these are just things you factor into the calculation when you make an investment. You do need to worry about currency fluctuations, not quite to the extent that Doug was mentioning it earlier. I'm just talking about ordinary fluctuations, the sort of thing you have to think about whenever you make international investments. But, you know, since 2009, the shekel U.S. dollar has fluctuated up and down to the tune of about 29%, and that's roughly the same as the fluctuation between the euro and the dollar, so nothing unusual. But why does that matter? So, for example, let's say you've just closed a round of, I don't know, $1 million U.S. Question is, do you take that $1 million and immediately convert it to shekels? Do you play the odds and hope that maybe the dollar strengthens? What do you do? These are just the kinds of things that you have to think about that you don't think about when you're investing directly in the United States. And then, of course, there's the obvious that Israel is a bit of a distance, so you're not likely to fly there every week to check up on things. I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. But in any case, these days with the internet, I don't find that to be a real problem. Communications is pretty straightforward. There are also some issues or things you might think are issues that actually, in my experience, are non-issues, like the language barrier. You know what, in my experience, most entrepreneurs speak excellent English, and the sad truth is many of them know more English grammar than I do, maybe a benefit of their education system, I don't know. Also, you always have to think about what does it mean to get away from the comfort of the U.S. legal system, assuming, of course, you think that that's comfortable. I don't know. But there are ways around that. So, for example, the startup company in Israel can have a parent company incorporated in the United States. You can work with an Israeli law firm that has also benefited from immigration and has attorneys who came from the United States and therefore understand both U.S. law and Israeli law. Or you might choose to ignore the entire issue, which is fine too, because in my experience, the legal system, the accounting practices, the IP practices in Israel are really rather robust, and I haven't seen that as being any kind of a problem. So let me just leave you with some final thoughts. There are many reasons to want to invest in Israel. I realize that in some cases your reasons might be ideological, religious, family-related, whatever. Those are personal matters. That's up to you. Personally, I think that this is business. Business is business. It's very important to invest with your head, not your heart, which means you do careful due diligence no matter what, just as you would investing in this country. Now, perhaps a very well-known example of somebody who's believed to be a highly objective and conservative but incredibly successful investor is Warren Buffett. And I'll just point out that back in 2006, Warren Buffett made his first international investment, and it was a big one, $5 billion in an Israeli company, Iskar. And as far as we can tell from their annual reports, it's worked out really well for him. I'd like to say that I've done an Iskar. I can't say I've done that, but I will say that so far investing in Israel has been, at least for me, relatively seamless. So if you're interested in doing so, I wish you happy hunting.
Thank you. Greg Slater?
So I guess I'm going to play cleanup here and use Intel as a case study to drive home some of the points that Victor and others have made. Our presence in Israel goes back a number of decades, back to the 70s. We started off with R&D. That's why we have 4 design centers in various locations. We have one large factory in Kiryat Gat. We did have another factory in Jerusalem, but technology took over and it was too small to continue to expand and to update it, so that has been closed. We have 4 design centers, and those have been key to our success, as I'll explain in a minute. These are our employees. We have close to 8,000 employees total. More than half are in the design centers. We have a couple thousand in manufacturing, and the rest are administrative. Those are direct employees. We have 23,000 indirect employees, contractors, that we hire on a periodic basis to update the factories or to supply them and so forth. You can see here the amount of employees compared to the rest of the high-tech industry employee base is pretty large. And then in 2011, we grew by 10%, which is remarkable. Now, our total investment in Israel has been about $23 billion over the last decade. So, I'm sorry, this is exports, I'm sorry. I changed the order of the slide, so I got to pay attention to what I'm looking at. Exports are about $23 billion over the last decade. Last year was about $2.2 billion. That's a little lower, actually, because we were upgrading a factory. The total investment is about $10 billion. And what's interesting here is we haven't done any JVs. We've used our own money, and also the government has been quite generous in giving grants that are available to any high-tech industry that qualifies. And our industry is very capital intensive, and this is an example of government policy that has worked to attract investment. Because remember, we started off with R&D and then came in with manufacturing and continued to invest in leading-edge technology. So our factory in Kiryat Gat is at the leading edge. It's not backwards, and in part that's due to government support. The real story, though, is not manufacturing. The real story is design of our microprocessors. The 2 latest products, what's known as Ivy Bridge coming out this year and Sandy Bridge, are largely Israeli designed by Israeli engineers, and they have been a huge success to our company. Sandy Bridge has the highest sales rate of any microprocessor in Intel's history. We've been around 40 plus years, and Ivy Bridge is, with its new architecture, new 3D transistors that some of you may have heard of, is a remarkable architecture and has enhanced graphic capabilities and power savings and so forth. These things are really, truly amazing. But it's not just these two latest processors. There's a history here of design wins by Israeli engineers. And I just want to take a couple minutes to tell you about a story in 2003. I don't have a pointer, but right here, this Intel Centrino processor, the first real processor designed for laptops, mobile computing. What happened was we were hitting a power wall where we were focusing on speed, how fast the transistors in a microprocessor turn on and off. You know the gigahertz story. And we got rewarded by analysts for being on the leading edge, continuously increasing the speed of our microprocessors. The problem is the faster the microprocessor goes, or the engine gets revved, the more heat is produced, to the point where it was becoming like a nuclear plant. The fan that you would need to cool off this little tiny microprocessor was going to be much bigger than the laptop, and obviously not work. Well, the engineers in the Haifa Design Center saw this coming, and they called it the power wall. And they spent months persuading Intel executives back at headquarters that we needed to change the whole architecture that we had been wed to because it was so financially beneficial. And they took trips every few weeks to headquarters with more and more data to convince executives that it wasn't the total speed that mattered, it was distribution of computing power. And you could get power savings off of it, and you could make the die thinner, and it wouldn't need the cooling, and you could come up with the things, the ultrabooks that you're going to have today, as well as the thinner laptops. So this was a huge advancement and was very beneficial to the company because it led to other architectural modifications. It got us off of our lockstep innovation treadmill, and it was called a right-hand turn because we changed the whole architecture of the processors. Then in 2005, we faced a formidable competition for server microprocessors. And again, engineers in Israel came up with a new architecture built in part on the one in 2003, and it's known as the Core Dual or Intel Core architecture. And that has been a huge benefit to us. And Ivy Bridge and Sandy Bridge are really enhancements of that architecture. So in some ways, some of the press reports have said that, you know, Intel Israel saved the company or provided a lifeline to. What it really did, you know, the attributes that Victor talked about, the resilience, the risk-taking that is so inherent in Intel employees and, well, all employees in Israel because of the history and what they've been through and so forth, was critical to continue to keep Intel, this large company, innovative, to take the risks necessary to push boundaries on innovation and to change the mentality that comes with past success. Now, very quickly, it's not all about design innovation. Engineers in Israel have managed to develop a lot of other products at the platform level. I don't know if you've heard of WiDi. It streams videos from your laptops to your TV seamlessly. Or of Thunderbolt technology, where it allows huge amounts of data to be transferred very quickly between devices using cable networks. Or some of the software enhancements, and this is way too detailed to go through in this presentation. But the point is that it isn't just all about microprocessors. It's about services, software, platform ingredients, and manufacturing. Even though we have a copy exact process where the manufacturing technology is actually developed in Oregon, where we have a ton of engineers with lots of background, been there forever, and then transferred around the world to make sure the product is exact. What Israel's been able to do is, for example, make the first perfect 100% yield 300 millimeter wafer with no defects at all. Has never been done before. Usually in the process you get some defect rate, and you get some defects. So even in manufacturing, they've proven their worth, and that's why they're on the leading edge in their factory. So what are the spin-off benefits from all this? Here you can tell a lot of Intel employees don't always stay at Intel, even though we're the greatest company to work for. You know, they go off and they use their knowledge to start 30 new companies funded every year on average since 2006 from Intel employees. And they create new jobs, they create new innovation, they raise new capital, and the cycle goes on. So there are, and those, and somebody mentioned, I can't remember if it was Victor or somebody else, they were dependent in part on U.S. technology, right? They took U.S. technology and carried it to the next step in many ways. You saw that in the microprocessor design space, but in other spaces too. And so that partnership within the company has worked extremely well. The story with Intel Centrino, that mobile microprocessor, where mid-level Israeli executives, managers, came over and challenged top-level Intel executives, was critical to our company. And even though we have that in our culture, the constructive confrontation we call it, the bigger the company got, the harder it was to implement that value. Yet these Israelis, it's part of their culture, and I don't think they'll ever lose it. And that's why they get all these benefits. Here's some other benefits that have happened as a result of our presence in Israel. And this is just in 2011. 4.1 billion of indirect, direct, reciprocal procurement. So that generates its own innovation among the suppliers. So that's it.
Thank you very much. One thing that we have heard you touch on, but I'd like to get more discussion of, is the why of, why does Israel seem to produce this kind of innovation, and that is so extraordinary. I mean, it seems to compare well not only with other smaller countries around the world, but even with the United States. And I'd be interested in all of your thoughts on and the thoughts of all of you of what are the kinds of things that you think account for Israel's success in innovation, and especially are there things, for example, in their education system that we should be paying attention to draw lessons from for our own educational system, or are there other things? I mean, there may be some things in Israel that are just unique to Israel, but are there things that are going on in Israel that are producing this kind of entrepreneurial and innovation success that can be drawn on for lessons for the United States? Greg, you want to start?
I'll answer the first question because I think you raised three questions. The education one and the other one, that second, third. First question on why, I hinted at it, they're always questioning, right? In fact, Muli Eden, who's now the president of Intel Israel, went back to Israel, joked, and he said, sometimes they'll just say, why are you my manager? Why am I not your manager? That's the way they are. And they confront the issue head on, which is very refreshing and actually can be quite disorganized, but very productive. So there's a story about an American executive going over to one of our plants, and he noticed the Israelis coming out of the room, and they had red faces, and they were shouting at each other. He said, what is happening? And the guy who started Intel Israel said, oh, nothing. We just reached some good conclusions. It's that resilience, that questioning, that can do, and I'm going to get at it no matter what. And hierarchy and all that other stuff goes out the window. So that's part of it. I don't know how exactly those traits have developed, but I'm sure others have the expertise to perhaps suggest.
Eitan, you want to?
If you agree.
Yeah, I agree. But there are many explanations. Actually, if you go to Startup Nation, they actually have a theory there that this is much related to the military service. I'm not sure that that's an important element, but I think there's much. This is like a phenomenon with a positive feedback. The entrepreneurs, the initial entrepreneurs that came out of, some of them came out of the defense industry and wanted to pursue civilian technology. I think they set the scenario for these new heroes to be successful. And once that happened, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur and be successful. But I can tell you one thing that I think is very different from other places, I think including the US. It's not only the money. And sometimes even the money is the second issue. The first issue is the willingness to do something that contributes and makes a difference. And I think that's a very important factor. You can, if you go only after the money, I don't think you can make it. You have to have some other motivation. And I think there's a lot of that within the Israeli society in general. And I think also it's very important to say that the leadership, there were people with vision that established an ecosystem that supports all this. It's not trivial. I mean, the fact that there was a very close relationship between government and private sector in the 70s, and an ecosystem that was established to support all this entrepreneurship. So, you know, there are many elements. The other one that I want to mention is that even within large companies, let's say that in the 70s, the main companies were defense companies. Defense companies internally actually have this culture of saying, come with new ideas and make a difference. So there's a cultural issue, is the ecosystem, is the support, and the government today, and the nice thing about it's not static, okay? People keep thinking and keep brainstorming to make sure that we face now that we face the future challenges of China and India and the competition. It's very important to brainstorm and make sure that the ecosystem also adjusts itself to the new situation.
Can you think of things that the Israeli government could do or the U.S. government could do to improve U.S. trade and investment between the countries? I mean, I think that Josh Cram referred to some issues relating to visas, relating to standards. What are the issues between the countries where improvements could be made or impediments removed?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are some of the key issues. You know, I'd say it's largely on the margins. You know, as I mentioned, it's very easy to do business in Israel for American companies for a lot of these reasons that we've been talking about. But there could be ways, sort of structural and policy ways, to advance the relationship. You know, the U.S. Israel Free Trade Agreement, which was sort of intended to be the governing piece of paper or pieces of paper that would sort of advance this relationship, is 26 years old. It's, I think, a 20-page document or so. And it doesn't cover a lot of the issue areas that are part and parcel of the U.S.-Israel commercial relationship today: e-commerce, intellectual property. And it doesn't lay out a whole lot of ways in which the countries can come together to look at emerging technologies and areas that the countries can collaborate, sort of from a policy perspective, on some of the standards relating to these new areas. But I know that these are areas that are being discussed now between the two governments, and I think we support and encourage that. And I think that's a good thing. But there may be things like that on the margins that could improve the relationship.
Immigration has already been mentioned. That's a key for us because we have the Israeli engineers come over and get trained in Oregon on the latest process technology. The easier that is, the better off we are without delay and so forth. What
about the intellectual property issues? I mean, there've been a a number of criticisms directed at Israel that Israel was not doing enough to protect intellectual property. And I mean, is that, where does that issue stand now? Eitan, do you want to?
Well, I think that that's really not true. Okay, and actually, maybe after me, the expert is here in the room. Okay, and I'm not the expert. Oad is the expert. But let me say the following: I think that's really not true. Maybe there is one issue that has been emphasized and is related to the pharmaceuticals, but in all other aspects, Israel has a very well structured and very relatively simple process for patenting. And actually, when you have a U.S. patent, it's very easy to get an Israeli patent if you want. It's very cheap. So anyone that really wants to protect it, let's say that you have a U.S. patent and you feel that you need to have an Israeli patent. So maybe someone in Israel doesn't take advantage of the IP for some reason. It's really a matter of not a big effort. Okay, that's one. Second, I would say that from a cultural point of view of doing business, Israelis are very respectful of the IP of their partners. Are very, very careful about it. And I think that I never heard a business person complain about that aspect of it. I did hear people complain about the chutzpah, okay? I heard that. And the fact that the Israelis are hard negotiators, but never heard someone say he stole my know-how.
Doug, I would also add, and I haven't heard this criticism, so I can't speak to it directly, but I'm not sure how it would actually manifest itself in practice, because you have to look at how the patent system works. If you have a U.S. patent, and let's say Israel didn't respect the patent at all and just stole the idea and whatever, and then tried to sell in the United States, guess what? It's totally enforceable here. You can't do that without running afoul of the U.S. patent law. Let's say you wanted to take your invention, the invention that you stole, and you wanted to sell it in Europe. Well, that company probably has patent protection in Europe. So the most that I would say is perhaps you could take the invention and sell it in Israel. Well, guess what? What I said earlier, it's not much of a market, so it won't get you very far. So I don't actually know in practice how this would even manifest itself as being a problem.
I can't imagine there's serious issues in Israel, at least not in the last 10 years, because I've been involved in IP policy for my company. And maybe before then, a couple of decades ago, before there were innovative companies in Israel, but now that there are a lot of innovative, they have their own interests, so they're going to want strong IP protection. We don't have that phenomenon yet in China and India and Brazil, so you get problems there. I've never heard of a single IP protection issue in Israel. But there is one other area, and that is encryption controls. That it's very burdensome in Israel on the export side, and even though there are legitimate security interests, they could streamline that process so that commercial products are not affected. They may have military applications, but they're built and designed for the commercial market.
Good. I'd be happy to open up the floor to questions. What I would appreciate your doing is waiting until the microphone gets brought to you, because otherwise people won't be able to hear who are listening over the internet. So why don't we start with this gentleman here at the tie front row. Hold on one second. If you could identify yourself and your affiliation, please, and then ask your question.
Thank you. My name is David McCormack from the U.S. Department of Commerce, and I think my question is for Mr. Udalevich, and the amazing work that the Bird Foundation does. It's tangentially related to the topic, almost related, but Josh mentioned very briefly the new opportunities in natural gas in Israel. And I wonder if that's something the Bird Foundation can help U.S. companies that are risk averse get in there and explore.
Thank you for the question. Because actually we are doing that continuously in later years. that wasn't really the case in the 80s. But when you look at the type of projects that we consider and approve today, that's very much the case, except that we're not talking about a U.S. company really looking at the Israeli market so much, but how, by cooperating with the Israeli company, they can access other markets, okay? And for example, in the energy sector, we have many of the projects we have approved are really small companies in the U.S. looking first for complementary technology and maybe to access additional market. Because if the Israeli company has access to a European country or to India, they will go together. So it will save effort and funding to the U.S. company. And I would to add, if it's relevant to the Israeli market, they will do it together in the Israeli market. Okay, so the answer to you is yes. The answer is yes, but it's not only the Israeli market.
This gentleman here.
Good afternoon. My name is Todd Wiggins. I'm a local journalist and interested in economic development topics. I want to start by saying, Mr. Slater, it was very interesting to hear about Intel, because all of us who own laptops, which is just about everyone out there, probably knows what's been going on with the Intel processor the last couple of years, particularly I own a MacBook Pro, and that has a direct ramifications for the efficiency of my system. I wanted to ask to all of you, what are the military implications of what is going on, which is in the headlines right now with what could be happening between Israel and Iran, and that seems to be obviously the subject of concern. And then, of course, our Mr. Obama has stated publicly, so to speak, that U.S. has Israel's back. And what does that mean, and how does that affect the perception of investors who are looking at potential relationships, etc.?
I would expand the question. One of the things that that skeptics raise is the question of lost production time because of wars or other security-related crises. And perhaps, Greg, you could tell us something about Intel's experience. And I know that Eitan lives in northern Israel and has some experience about that also, but I think that'd be an interesting issue to address.
I can only say we haven't experienced any lost production time, even though there have been rockets that have come, not too close, but not too far away from our Kiryat plant. I would repeat what Warren Buffett's experience when he was making a decision to invest $5 billion in that Israeli company, and rockets were landing much closer to that company, and the CEO called him up and said, "Don't worry, we're not going to lose any production time," and that's what's happened, right? So there's a lot of resilience and risk taking and just living with it. They're not going to shut down the plant unless they absolutely have to. That's the only thing I could say.
Eitan?
Yeah, I have thought about this question, obviously, for myself, because I'm investing my own money, so I'll be careful. But, I take a long view of this. Tragically, there's been a lot of conflict spanning decades, and yet experience shows that from a business perspective, it works out. So I say, okay, they've made it work before. I'm going to assume they're going to continue to make it work, and that's the best I can do.
I can also make a comparison. You remember the sniper in Washington, D.C.? I was around. I think business stopped more because of the sniper than everything that's happening in Israel. People are very used to it. Now, it's true that investors may be worried. So that's something we have to work on. Because in that point, you're right. An investor that reads all the press may become worried. So that's something that concerns. But in general, most people react like Victor, especially if they come to Israel and they visit and they see what's going on. I mean, life continues and papers published.
I don't want to discriminate against people sitting in the back, so why don't we start with the gentleman back there?
Hi, Steve Landy, Manchester Trade.
Is your microphone on?
My voice is on. It's on. Man, as I said, I had the pleasure of doing the U.S. Israeli free trade agreement. I didn't realize it was so long ago, but nice to know. Yes, it's a time that is being looked at for increase, improvement, and so on. And I strongly suggest that we look at investment. We go beyond USTR and trade and make it a very comprehensive and exciting agreement. My question, however, is focused more on Bird and your comment about cooperation with third countries. We do a lot of work in Africa, which, as you know, the Israeli stock is very high in many countries. And some countries, despite the way CNN decides to play it, are doing very well. Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria has come up with some recent discoveries and so on. Is there a possibility, or do you reach out to these places? I don't know whether I would call it a junior bird or a tutorial bird or something, but I can't think of a better export that you can bring to Africa in terms of the current things that are occurring than something like that. One very quick comment, which has nothing to do with the memo, well, it has a little to do with it. I'm a history military channel buff, and they have a couple of films recently about German technology and how close they came in World War II, and at the same time the Manhattan Project. I would just say, thank God that Hitler was such a schmuck and got everybody out and didn't save the brain power, because look at what Israel has done on its own. So we're very thankful for a different way, but thank you.
So the question, I understand, is how could we use a bird model for to bring products or business to Africa? I think I understood the question that way. Incidentally, in Israel, there is a lot of work to encourage Israeli companies to export to developing countries, including Africa. Not related to bird. I mean, we don't do that, but I know for sure, I know for fact that it has been recognized that those markets are important, and the question is how small companies can do more business in Africa and in other developing countries.
The lady here in third row.
Hi there. Is this on? My name is Cameron Peak. I'm an innovations director at Mercy Corps, which is an international NGO. And my question is for Eitan, and a little bit more about kind of your selection methodology for those projects that you choose to support. I think you said in a really interesting place where you've been able to see examples of real success. So one, is there anything specific that you look for, and what are some of the characteristics of kind of successful projects?
Mm-hmm. You ask sector-wise, if we or okay. First of all, sector-wise, we are not focused. As I said, we accept all sectors. The criteria are innovation, business potential, and very important also the partnership, the quality of the partnership. So when we judge a project, when we look at the project, we look at in those three parameters: innovation, business prospect, and partnership quality. Okay.
Has there been any secret sauce or anything that specifically indicates likely success?
Not the secret.
Like a secret sauce. You mean any secret recipe that makes that happen? That yeah. Okay. You know, it's hard to say. There are many ways of succeeding. One way of succeeding, I would say, if you have the one model that worked very well when you had a small company in Israel partnering with a larger company in the U.S. that had a special strategic interest in the specific technology. Okay, I can give you an example. For example, recently in 2010, McGraw-Hill Education acquired a company called Tegrity after they did the BEAR project. And the reason is that McGraw-Hill Education had an internal strategic development that's actually fitted very nicely what Integrity was already doing. Okay, so they have to overcome issues like maybe, not invented here because they were already doing that, but actually there was a perfect fit between the strategy of the large company and the innovation that was brought from the Israeli company. But that's, only one way of succeeding. There are many ways of succeeding.
The gentleman in the back.
Hi, I'm Randy Foreman. Two questions. I want to get you to expand on two development areas in Israel. One that you've touched on. You touched on the oil and natural gas development in Israel. Could you talk a little? I'd like to see what the panel's thoughts are on that, what they are. And then secondly, about the Negev Desert. How is that going to bloom in the future? In terms of being able to have towns building up in the Negev Desert and for the desert to bloom, and what kind of mineral deposits are going to be found in Israel. I'd like to find out what your thoughts are in those two areas.
I'll start with the natural gas. I'm not as in tune on the Negev. The natural gas find in Israel, this was about 2.5 years ago. It was the largest discovery of natural gas in the last decade or so. Off the coast of Haifa, it was a couple of different finds, and it upends the joke. I think there's a lot of folks that are upset because the joke that Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt to the one place in the Middle East that there's no oil is out the window. So there's a lot of rabbis that are probably pissed off about that. But it's a big deal. It's a huge deal for Israel. And I think, onto the Negev point is, Israel's been good at developing renewable technologies, best practices around water use and water technologies that they've now been able to export around the world because of that, because they've lacked natural resources. They've had to figure out how to make the desert bloom. And that's remarkable. But on the natural gas side, I think there's tremendous opportunities that'll come with this. I think that the state of Israel is going through a process right now to look at kind of what the regulatory regime is, what the public policies around this sector are going to be. Are they going to export? And I think the indications are that yes, the Minister of Energy and Water, Uzi Landau, indicated that they're going to export and they're going to build an LNG facility perhaps. But what are those? What is the regime, the regulatory regime around that? What is it going to look like? And I think it's continuing to evolve. But I think from our perspective, from the American company's perspective, there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration in this sector. This is an area where we have a lot of these kinds of capabilities. And I know that Senator Landrieu from Louisiana was in Israel recently. I think we spoke. Yeah, right. Okay. Nice. We'll tell her thanks for going. And and I think that what we've been talking about also, there's a lot of opportunities between Louisiana and other places in Texas to create connections from academia. Louisiana State, and this is what David Gillers, her staffer who's on this, talks about this a lot, about how Louisiana State University has a lot of these capabilities, sort of petro technology, and the Israelis, Technion, they have a lot of capabilities and a lot of smart people that are thinking about a lot of different kinds of topics, but this is not one of them. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities sort of on the academic side, on the commercial side, for American companies like Renewable Energy that have been in Israel and that are continuing to develop in the sector and explore. I think you'll see more and more American engagement, hopefully, in the sector as there's more clarity on kind of the public policies that surround it.
Josh, I just want to take a little bit the opposite perspective on this. There's the saying, beware what you wish for. Earlier we had a lengthy discussion or some discussion about what it is that makes Israel a great place in terms of entrepreneurship and so on. I suppose it might be argued that the lack of natural resources has actually been a boon. And that you get scrappy, you make do, you do what you can because you don't have a lot of other exports and so on. Plenty of countries, I would say, have in some sense suffered because of oil and gas finds and such. It's all going to depend on how this unfolds. Hopefully the Israeli government will be very wise. We will see. Now, from the perspective of alternative energy, I mean, the Negev Desert is obviously a place you might want to think about doing a lot of solar power. But I will tell you, even just from the perspective of what's going on in this country, natural gas has gotten really cheap here in the United States because of shale and so on. This is the enemy of alternative energy. It's tougher to do wind power when you're pricing it against when your competition is natural gas. You're basically pricing it on the margins. And that has got to, the same economics has got to be at work in a country such as Israel. So we'll see what happens. As I say, hopefully they'll be smart about it.
But I can say that we're very happy to have gas, and I can tell you, I'm actually managing a program for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and I'm very keen and involved in renewable energy. But I'll tell you why we're happy, because otherwise we would stay with our coal power plants, okay, and coal is much worse than gas. And Israel has decided it has already 40% electricity production from gas, and it's going further. That's one. Second, the gas we get today, we're dependent on foreign sources, which are not always reliable. And when we don't have gas, we have to switch to diesel, which is really bad, expensive and dirty. And last, I think the government is being wise in the way they're going to manage the money. I think the idea, there was a big argument in Israel what to do with the future funding, the future income. And I think hopefully they will do what they say, and it will be wisely invested in, for example, education, and not only make the country very pleased with what all this money. I think that gas is really a great and incredible development for Israel.
Eitan, I have to say it's heartening to hear that you have faith in your politicians. That's refreshing to hear, in fact.
I think we have time for one more question. The gentleman here on the aisle.
Thank you. Yonoyama is my name, from Mitsui & Company, Japanese multinational. I did learn great value of your innovation startup country. But the better marketing will get you bigger market, and because of the global environment, the better or more innovative marketing may get you better return. So a question is, how do you, or the BIRD is kind of a marketing tool to exponentially enlarge your return, or thanks to internet and type of, or cloud computing type of marketing tools may get Israel direct marketing resources, and you are going to plan for direct marketing. I just wanted to learn future Israel marketing plan. Thank you.
I also had some trouble in understanding exactly what you're asking. Whether BIRD is viewed as a marketing tool, and if we could bring the microphone back to the gentleman.
Sorry. Apologize.
That's okay. So partnership with the United States through BIRD will give you better access to the market, to the States and to the rest of the world. And I think that makes sense. But so that's the future course, or you, like you said, for Africa, you try to seek for direct access through your direct effort for marketing.
Okay. Well, in present days, you always look at the global market. Okay, so if you look at two companies that join forces under a BIRD project, they never would be looking only at the U.S. market or the Israeli market. They will always be looking at a global market. Now, concerning developing countries, of course, in many cases, the products that are developed, and I have more than one example, in which their first market is actually, Victor mentioned one, the first market is actually India. Or it may be, I know, a telecom company which is first looking at Brazil or as their first market, because they have a lot of simple phones, simple cellular phones, and the technology they're developing is exactly for that. Okay.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists. I think this has been a terrific discussion and does shine light on an extremely important aspect that's kind of under-attended to in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. So please join me in thanking Greg Slater, Victor Mizrahi, Eitan Yudalevich, and Josh Cram. And thank you all for coming.
Oh, thank you. Can you have it?
I can email.